Mozart was fortunate to have come to Vienna at a time when Enlightenment ideas of liberty and equality were making themselves felt.
Joseph II came to the throne in 1780. He had a very radical program of reform. Joseph had lifted press restrictions, and that really unleashed a whole kind of new intellectual energy. There's a much more open and tolerant social scene in Vienna, and for Mozart the effect of this was partly economic, because there was a new emergent middle class who were willing to pay for his services and things.
Suddenly realizes he's fashionable, and that if he's very quick he can set up a series of subscription concerts. That is, he can sell tickets for a series of occasions to his pupils and to the aristocracy and so forth. And for this he will then run up perhaps half a dozen piano concertos for himself to appear as soloist, which of course is very good for his reputation as a teacher.
No question that he was raking it in. Mozart was constantly giving concerts. He was constantly publishing music. The year 1782 to 1785 are generally held up as being the happiest of Mozart's life.
He says, I wrote this music with both the general audience and also the connoisseurs in mind. Take, for instance, this K415, the finale, which has a chirpy rondo theme. Well, that's typically the music everybody would be whistling in the street next day after hearing it. But quite soon after this theme, Mozart does something what actually never or rarely ever happens in a rondo or in a last movement. Music becomes slow, it becomes an adagio and minor. So it's suddenly a very deep personal music. I think both of these elements were there in Mozart's character, the general audience who enjoyed a good joke and some cheap and cheerful music, and the sophisticated connoisseur who wanted more, who wanted deeper music, more personal, more involved. And I think that's these two things together make up Mozart's genius.
Mozart was his own impresario. Mozart was responsible for hiring a hall, printing tickets, distributing programs, going to his musician friends, most of whom played for the opera, and seeing if they were free and getting together an orchestra for himself, running the rehearsals and giving the concerts. It was entirely his own venture, and I think this is important because it also shows that Mozart is not someone who's simply lost in music making and music creation, but is a fully rounded and actually quite adventurous person. And I think that the adventurousness that gives him the strength to kind of create this new kind of concert-giving situation in Vienna is reflected in the brilliance and the aggressiveness and the attractiveness of his compositions.
Yesterday in the theatre, I played a concerto. The theatre was very full, and I was received again by the Viennese public so cordially that I really ought to feel delighted. I had already left the platform, but the audience would not stop clapping, and so I had to repeat the rondo, upon which there was a regular torrent of applause.
I think Foreman's Amadeus was a fascinating film, but I was outraged because it was so inaccurate, factually, But what seems to me fundamentally true about the movie is that it presents Mozart as not just a lively person, but as essentially a performer. So that when Mozart is presenting himself to a court, he's performing. When Mozart plays, of course, he is performing. When Mozart lives his life, he is performing. But more important than that, as a creative artist, Mozart is performing. When he writes a piece of music, he's not writing according to some rules. He's not writing according to any preconceived notion of what's correct and what's incorrect. He is being a performer. He's writing the best piece of music that he can that will astound and amaze the audience and keep them on their edge of their seats.
Er hat sich um 6 Uhr in der Früh rasieren und frisieren lassen. Er ist dann entweder hinausgefahren, um seine Unterrichte zu geben, seinen adeligen Schülerinnen, die ihm ja sehr hoch bezahlt haben für diese Arbeit, oder er hat natürlich auch am Vormittag komponiert. Der Nachmittag war meistens dem Spiel gewidmet. Er ist hinausgefahren in den Prater, hat Billard gespielt oder er hat in einem Wirtshaus oder in einem Kaffeehaus andere Spiele gespielt. Man weiß nicht sehr viel über seine Frau Constanze. Sie war sicher auf der einen Seite eine ideale Partnerin für ihn. Sie hat mit ihm sehr viel Billard gespielt, sie hat sicher mit ihm Karten gespielt.
Constanze has a decent soprano voice, and Mozart wrote some music for her. He wrote for her the soprano parts in one of his greatest works, his Mass in C minor.
Vienna, 12th of April, 1783. My wife is in such excellent health. All women should thank God if they are so fortunate in their pregnancy. 3rd of May, 1783. Dearest Father, the weather is lovely. We have taken our lunch out of doors and shall stay on until the evening. My whole company consists of my little wife, who is pregnant, and hers consists of her little husband, who is not pregnant, but fat and flourishing.
Es gibt diese Stelle in dem D-Moll-Streichquartett, wo Mozart selber sagt, er habe in dem einen Satz die Geburtswehen seiner Frau Constanze ausgedrückt. Ich muss ehrlich sagen, wenn ich mit der Partitur in der Hand den in Frage kommenden Satz mir anhöre, ich kann nicht die Stelle finden, wo ich sagen könnte, aha, dieses ist jetzt die Geburtswehe von Constanze.
Congratulations, Father, you are a grandpapa. Yesterday, at 6:30 in the morning, my dear wife was safely delivered of a fine, sturdy boy, as round as a ball. The child is healthy and has a tremendous number of things to do. I mean, drinking, sleeping, yelling, pissing, shitting, dribbling, and so forth. Little Raimund is so like me that everyone immediately remarks on it. It is just as if my face had been copied. My dear little wife is absolutely delighted, as this is what she had always desired.
The Mozart's first child, Raimund Leopold, who was born in June of 1783, died a couple of months later while the Mozarts were in Salzburg. They had left the child with a nanny in Vienna, while Wolfgang and Constanze went to visit Leopold and Mozart's sister in Salzburg. And the relative lack of commentary in the letters about the death of this child has on some occasions led to the speculation that somehow the death of a child in the 18th century, when mortality rates were high, was less traumatic for the family than it is now, where we expect children to survive. What little evidence there is suggests that Mozart was firmly attached, proud to be a father, loved this little child, and that he was unquestionably distraught when the child died.
He must have been very affected by it, because in many letters he writes how much he's looking forward, how Constanze is feeling. It's a very closely and lovingly documented pregnancy. It must be somewhere, it must be told, this sadness. But for example, just that bass note as a fate, as a question, and I think an expression of it's like a voice answering back. It's like a question, it's not resolved. We still haven't found the answer. And we might assume, that's it, isn't it? That's it. I was in doubt, but now I know. But another question. So in that, it shows us thought, a human emotion, which we all felt and feel. It's questioning, yearning, and wondering about life and its reasons, its meaning.
I have works to compose which at the moment are bringing in money.
He composed a symphony when the symphony was needed, or an overture when an overture was needed. They did not just compose for fun.
The point being, he was writing to order, he was writing because there was money involved, because he had a living to make. He wasn't writing because that's what he most wanted to write. At this point in my life, I most want to write an opera or a piano concerto or whatever it may be. So he could turn his hand to anything at any time.
He was very busy writing for friends. He was very busy giving private concerts at which he played piano sonatas or violin sonatas or chamber music with piano. He was very busy composing music that was specifically intended for publishers.
He was an urban man, a man very much at one with his own society. There was very little feeling for nature in Mozart's music, unlike Haydn, who, of course, lived large parts of his life out in the country in a great house away from cities. One feels that Mozart is a civilized urban composer writing for gatherings of fashionable people. One somehow senses the stirring of the silks and so on in the audience.
Dear Father, I have something to tell you about our maid. She complains that she gets to bed too late and has to get up too early. Though I should have thought one would get enough sleep between 11 and 6, which is after all 7 hours. We ourselves do not go to sleep until midnight, and we get up at 5:30 or even 5 as we go to the Augarten almost every morning. And what is she to do? To clear the table, hand round the dishes, and take them away and help my wife to dress and undress. She cannot even light a fire, let alone make coffee. Twice when we were out, a certain Herr Johannes came to our quarters, ordered in wine, and the girl, who is not accustomed to drinking it, swilled so heavily that she couldn't walk without support, and the second time she was sick all over the bed.
In September 1784, another son was born, Carl Thomas, who would survive to adulthood. Mozart, Constanze, and the new baby moved to a bigger apartment.
You can see a prosperous middle-class entrepreneur. You can imagine him setting up there to receive his important guests, run his not inconsiderable business.
He always received me very hospitably and warmly. He particularly loved drinking punch, and I saw him drinking an awful lot of punch. He was also a passionate billiard player and had a billiard table in his house, in this room. He said, I played lots and lots of billiards with him, and I always lost. This is actually original, and this was officially his study. This cost him 480 florins a year, but he earned between 2,000 and 6,000 florins, which is anything between 44,000 and 132,000 euro. I mean, phenomenal. His sister said this was the best portrait that she knew of Mozart. I mean, he was certainly under 5 foot. He must have been extraordinary looking as a person. Very thin and very pale, with a mass of blonde hair, of which he was a little proud.
He was very particular in the way he looked. I mean, if you see this inventory of the household when he died, the amount of silk embroidered costumes and evening coats and trousers, I mean, he was quite fuzzy about the way he looked and came across to people, but at the same time, he needed probably to blow off steam. He was an extreme hard worker. If you just see the sheer amount of paper he filled with notes in his not too long life, I mean, it's an amazing amount of music he wrote.
Wir wissen, dass sich durch die Freunde überhaupt nicht stören ließ, dass im Kaffeehaus komponiert hat, beim Billardspielen, wenn gewartet hat, hat komponiert. Und hatte auch auf Reisen, hatte immer ein Blatt Papier bei sich und etwas zu schreiben und hat seine kompositorischen Einfälle niedergeschrieben.
The thing to understand about Mozart is his artistic ambition, his seriousness of purpose, his self-critical faculties. And I think that's always the same with great artists. I think there's always a myth of it being very easy for people. I mean, if going to the other extreme, you think of Lennon and McCartney, and the reason they were the great pop group of the 1960s was actually because they took it incredibly seriously. And in a very, very different way, that's true of Mozart.
Mozart obviously regarded Haydn as the one composer of the day who really was on his level and perhaps his peer. And he writes these quartets in some fear and trembling, one thinks, which in a way knocks on the head the myth that everything was perfectly conceived in his head before he put a note down on paper. In those quartets he really was trying very hard, and Haydn was duly impressed and made his famous remark afterwards to Leopold Mozart, which must have felt like the justification of Leopold's entire life. Haydn said, "Before God and as an honest man, your son is the greatest composer known to me in person or by reputation. He has taste, and what is more, the most profound knowledge of composition."
Restless music, so full of angst and fright, and it must have been one of the first examples of that kind of music in music history, and I just get goosebumps when I think about it. It's like masses of people just moving around, and he uses very small intervals but very restless figurations all the time, and it's on the edge of exploding. And then out of that comes the entry of the piano, which is so different, so much freer, big intervals, and it's like this one human being in the middle of it.
Salzburg, the 3rd of November, 1785. Dear daughter, the journalist Hübner met me a few days ago and said, "It really is astonishing to see what a number of compositions your son is publishing." I had nothing to say, as I knew nothing, for it was more than 6 weeks since I had had a letter from your brother.
Obviously, there's so many wonderful Mozart concertos, but one of my favorite is the K491. Everything is so dramatic. It's like a Mozart opera that obviously that you can think about whatever you like to think. You know, some dark place, and then people are wandering around to try to find the lights, or to try to find a way to get out from this big jungle or dark places, which it's hard to get out. And then obviously when piano comes, it's a little bit like a little girl, you know, and standing somewhere and get confused. And then obviously this second movement is, I think this is what we call a love song. But this is, you know, you don't see your lover yet, but it's like whoever waiting there for love. It's like that. Mozart is full with the drama, which is sometimes it's really dangerous and sometimes very nervous and sometimes very peaceful. And then somehow you see all kinds of different characters. Old man, a nice lady, a bad guy. And you know, this is very theater-like.
Mozart's work was driven by demand. And, you know, if he was writing a series of piano concertos for a subscription series, and then the opportunity, the long-looked-for opportunity to write another comic opera, which is what he wanted to do perhaps most of all at this stage, then he would rapidly pack off those piano concertos and the next day would sit down and start the opera. At this point, he meets Lorenzo da Ponte, a very colourful, rather louche figure who went through about 15 different professions. But he proved to be the man Mozart was looking for. Mozart clearly feels that the success of an opera depends on finding the right librettist, the man who writes the words, that true phoenix, as he calls him. He and Mozart seem to have, between them, found a new operatic pace, a sort of new naturalness.
The story of Figaro is one of the servant Figaro who finds himself in the service of the Count. The opera begins with Figaro celebrating the fact that he's about to get married. He is completely happy that Susanna will be his wife within a day. Figaro suddenly realizes that the plans that the Count has are not the plans of a man who has good intents towards Susanna. And that moment, we're entered upon not only a sexual confrontation, but also a political and power and social confrontation.
Se vuol ballare, signor contigo, se vuol ballare, signor contigo, il chitarrino le suonerò, il chitarrino le suonerò, sì, le suonerò, sì, le suonerò. Se vuol venire nella mia scuola la capriola le insegnerò. Se vuol venire nella mia scuola la capriola le insegnerò, sì, le insegnerò, sì, le insegnerò.
One has the combination of a perfect libretto and even more spectacular music, which tells the story of human existence and of humanity, of love, of the petty jealousies and vengeance and all of the things that we as human beings deal with, both today and forever.
There's an authenticity about it, an authenticity about its tone, for the simple reason that Mozart knew about that world of social deference, the world which Mozart found himself in as a servant of an archbishop.
Della vostra saggezza il primo frutto oggi noi coglieremo. Le nostre nozze si son già stabilite. Ora a voi tocca, costei che in vostro dono il libato servò, coprir di questa simbolo d'onestà candida vesta.
He had that ability to characterize the person who was singing the aria in a few notes. That's one way in which Mozart is incalculably greater than all his contemporaries, because he really made characters with his music.
There's no question that he felt that the height of his creative powers to create beauty was focused firmly on how beautiful the sound of a soprano voice could be.
Where does this come from in a young man, this ability to express such complex issues and the way in which they would affect the innermost fears and feelings of a woman?
Manchmal würde ich mir wünschen, dass ich mich wie ein Instrument fühle, weil dann müsste ich nicht meinen Körper die ganze Zeit aufraffen und schonen und schlafen und gesund bleiben. Das sind die Nachteile dieses Instruments, das wir immer mit uns herumschleppen. Auf der anderen Seite ist es natürlich auch dieser unfassbare Vorteil, dass sich alles widerspiegelt in der Stimme. Alles. Vielleicht hat Mozart die Stimme deswegen so geliebt, weil sich die Seele in der Stimme widerspiegelt, ob wir wollen oder nicht.
No one really understands how it is that this peculiar sonic contrivance, this sonic artifact, this acoustic artifact which human beings have made up, moves us to the depths of our souls. Certainly does in the hands of these remarkable people who are carelessly referred to as geniuses.
By the summer of 1786, his success had made Mozart many enemies in Vienna, especially among the Italian court composers who did all they could to ensure Figaro's failure. Even worse, in November 1786, the Mozart's third baby, another son, died. In May 1787, Mozart's father, with whom he had never truly been reconciled, also died. Mozart remained in Vienna, but was grief-stricken. Then in October 1787, in Prague, where Figaro had been a huge hit, he and Da Ponte were commissioned to write a new opera. Mozart was in somber mood.
I have now made a habit of being prepared in all affairs of life for the worst. As death, when we come to consider it closely, is the true goal of our existence. I never lie down at night without reflecting that, young as I am, I may not live to see another day.
Don Giovanni has had in excess during his lifetime something like 2,000 conquests of ladies, and he could not resist the temptation. When the curtain goes up on Don Giovanni, we find him at a time when his life seems to be on the skids. He's attempting to make love to Donna Anna, and it seems to be an unsuccessful attempt. There's a challenge by the Commendatore, her father, and in the course of their fight, the Commendatore is killed, somewhat brutally these days.
Mozart is always trying to push the boundaries a bit further, that we are loving human beings. We do have the power to hurt, and we do have the power to betray. He acknowledges the human weakness in all of us.
As far as the women are concerned, it's a list of hideous, humiliating defeats. And many of those women would have killed themselves because of being dishonoured and chucked out of their houses.
Don Giovanni is not simply a manipulator, but he represents a great deal of what human beings are capable of when put in positions of power.
The great geniuses, they have this arc lamp of truth. There is nowhere to hide in its beam, but one thing it is not is judgmental. You say, this is a man, whether you like it or not. This man was without repentance, and there are many more of you out there. This is a good man, this is a bad man. This is a man who's good, who's done a terrible thing. This is a terrible man who's done a good thing. Giovanni is just a man, a failed man, a foiled man, a man who, in Da Ponte and Mozart's case, is living at a time in Europe when people are challenging everything from society to the notion of God itself.
His awareness of what the consequences are, perhaps were the things that guided him to take the more moral standpoint of saying, no, it's worth pursuing the nobler, more honorable position.
Despite his success in Prague, Mozart returned home to Vienna, where his ambition was always to secure a respected and well-paid position at court. In November 1787, the imperial chamber composer, von Gluck, died. Joseph II gave the post to Mozart. But the salary was modest, and he now found himself in financial difficulties.
Wolfgang Mozart to Michael Puchberg. Your true friendship and brotherly love embolden me to ask a great favor of you. I know I owe you 8 ducats, but at the moment I am in no position to pay you back this sum.
Austria got involved with yet another war with Turkey, and of course a lot of the top aristocracy were intimately connected with the military and so on, and money was scarcer and times were tighter.
Das ist eine Zeit gewesen, in der das Konzertwesen in Wien praktisch zum Erliegen gekommen ist. Die Verdienstmöglichkeiten außerordentlich gering waren für alle Kulturschaffende. Und dazu kam noch, dass Constanze Mozart in dieser Zeit häufig krank gewesen ist und sehr teure Kuren gebraucht hat.
There's still this attitude left from his early years that he wants to live, he wants to be able to consort with noblemen and count them among his friends. He had a middle-class income, and the difference between a nobleman's income and a middle-class income was not just a little, it was huge, it was vast.
Man muss dazu sagen, dass Mozart auf der anderen Seite ja auch viel Geld verliehen hat. Also an Leute, Freunde, Musikerfreunde aus seinem Umkreis. Der ganze Umgang von Mozart mit dem Geld ist ein verhältnismäßig lockerer gewesen.
Mozart had previously joined the Masons, where he found intellectual and social stimulation. He increasingly relied on these Masonic brothers for support.
Most beloved friend, I beg you to lend me until tomorrow at least a couple of 100 gulden. For my old landlord has been so importunate that in order to avoid an unpleasant incident, I have had to pay him on the spot, and this has made things very awkward for me. Our new apartment, thankfully, is cheaper. Most honourable brother of the order, I am grieved to be in such an extremity, but that is the very reason why I should like a fairly substantial sum for a somewhat longer period. Do come and see me. I am always at my new home. During the 10 days since I came to live here, I have done more work than in 2 months in my former quarters. If only black thoughts did not come to me so often.
It's so lovely, this music, and it's not at all, actually. With this rhythmic motif which go all through this first movement, and like the 3 first motif, pararam, 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 like somebody trying to find his words, tararam, piraram, pirararim, and suddenly this giant interval, and tiraram, pararam, pararam, and then the same more private, pararam, piraram, piririm, 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 piririm. It's full of sighings, it's full of screams also. Tiram, tiram, pam, 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 pam. There is this famous phrase from Arthur Schnabel. What he said was that Mozart's music was too easy for children and too complicated for professional musicians. And that's very true. It's so simple. You have the feeling that it's so natural. And the more natural it is, the more enigmatic it becomes.
Mozart's trip to Berlin, Dresden, Leipzig in 1789 is sometimes explained as an attempt on his part to escape from a stifling situation in Vienna, partly caused by the war and the lack of concerts, perhaps caused by a certain dissatisfaction. Maybe he felt he wasn't getting ahead.
Dearest, most beloved little wife. We did not arrive in Dresden until yesterday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because the roads were so bad. If only I had a letter from you. If I were to tell you all the things I do with your dear portrait, I think that you would often laugh. For instance, when I take it out of its case, I say, "Good day, little rascal, little turned-up nose." Today is the 6th day since I left you, and by heaven, it seems a year. I found a letter from you. That letter which I had longed for. I immediately went off in triumph to my room, kissed the letter countless times before breaking the seal, and then devoured it rather than read it. I stayed in my room a long time, for I could not read it or kiss it often enough. Berlin, 19th of May, 1789. How glad I shall be to be with you again, my darling. You will get on the very first night a thorough spanking on your dear little kissable arse, and this you may count upon.
The journey to northern Germany brought artistic, but not financial, success.
Vienna, 12th of July, 1789. If you, most beloved friend and brother, forsake me, we are altogether lost, both my unfortunate and blameless self and my poor sick wife and child. Instead of paying my debts, I am asking for more money.
Joseph II returned ill from the war against the Turks. Nevertheless, in July 1789, probably at Joseph II's request, Mozart received a commission to write the music for a new opera.
This was an attempt by Mozart and de Ponte, two men who are clearly at the top of their games, to write what is a very serious but at the same time beautiful and entertaining and captivating and moving piece of musical theater.
The opera was successful, but the run was cut short by Joseph II's death. Mozart's one-off fee for the music did not solve his financial problems.
Once more, but for the last time, I call upon you to stand by me to the utmost of your power in this most... I beg you to help me as much as you can just this once. If you can send me something, even though it be only the small sum you sent me last time, you will greatly oblige your friend and honourable brother. Received 25 gulden. Received 150 gulden. I share your view about getting some pupils, but I thought of waiting until I should be in our new quarters. I must have something to live on until I've arranged my concerts, and until the string quartets on which I am working have been sent to be engraved. So if only I had in hand 600 gulden at least, I should be able to compose with a fairly easy mind. Received 100 gulden. Mozart to Michael Puchberg, 12th of June, 1790. Dear friend, I have now been obliged to give away my quartets, those very difficult works, for a mere song, simply in order to have cash in hand to meet my present difficulties.
1791 is usually presented as the last year of the gradual decline in Mozart's health, in Mozart's creativity, in Mozart's spirit, and certainly in his finances. There's this long slide after Don Giovanni, it's downhill all the way. But when you read the letters and when you look at what Mozart did, 1791 was a fabulous year for Mozart.
Mozart was happy. He was respected, popular, and lucrative. He continued to hold his court position, largely writing dance music, and was certainly still in love.
Vienna, 7th of June, 1791. Mozart to his pregnant wife at the spa in Baden. Dearest, most beloved wife, I simply cannot describe my delight at receiving your last letter, which told me you were well and in good health. 11th of June. When you are bathing, do take care not to slip and never stay in alone. See that Karl behaves himself. Give him kisses from me. Take an electuary if you're constipated. Love me as I love you. I kiss you 2,000 times.
July 1791. Constanze gave birth to their 6th child, the second to survive, Franz Xavier Wolfgang. Mozart now received 2 opera commissions. One, the Clemency of Titus, commissioned for the new emperor. The other, the Magic Flute, commissioned for the suburban Viennese theatre of the impresario Emanuel Schikaneder. It was to be written in German, for as wide an audience as possible.
It's almost a pantomime, but it's a pantomime with an ethical and moralistic element to it. So it's as though the plot exists rather like a Shakespeare plot on 2 levels, an elevated level with the sort of magic goings on at the top and a popular level. The extraordinary thing about Mozart is how he finds music of different levels to fit these. It's an opera in which he writes in every conceivable style.
People are often talking about how he must have been so involved in the philosophy of the Magic Flute and so on. I don't think that's the point. He didn't write the Magic Flute words, Schikaneder did, imitating a whole series of magic and fashionably pseudo-philosophical operas. There's no great philosophy in the Magic Flute. There's just some extraordinarily wonderful music which makes us think that the somewhat dim words are more important than they really are. it's all intensely practical, all money-making activity. But of course, he could ally the most mundane money-making activity with musical thoughts of genius. I mean, that's the point. He doesn't have to have aims of genius. The genius leaks out round the edges while he's doing something totally practical.
Mozart lived until the French Revolution had opened. And you have to remember that the Magic Flute is written only about a year after the fall of the Bastille and shortly before the onset of the Terror. It's written in and about the period that Wordsworth refers to when he says, "Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive."
Vienna, 14th of October, 1791. Mozart to his wife at the spa in Baden. Yesterday I went to have lunch with our Karl at the boarding school. He still has his old bad manners, and he never stops chattering just as he used to do in the past. And he is, if anything, less inclined to learn than before.
Things were going well. His Magic Flute was still playing in Vienna. Clones et Tito had been a success. He had this great commission to write a clarinet concerto for his friend Anton Stadler. I think he was probably missing Constanze a lot. And that comes out especially in the slow movement. Somewhere along the way, I think it's crept into the Mozart mythology that he sensed that that was one of the last things he'd write. I don't feel that. I think it's actually an assertion of life force.
Stranger approaches him in a rather cloak and dagger way and commissions a requiem, which Mozart begins to feel, he feels distinctly spooky about. I don't think he ever knew that, in fact, it was commissioned by a nobleman who wanted to pass it off as his own work.
In November 1791, Mozart fell ill. By early December, he was bedridden.
Constanze's sister, Sophie. On account of his swollen condition, he was unable to turn in bed. Ah, dear Sophie, how glad I am that you've come. You must stay here tonight and see me die. His pupil, Susmir, was at Mozart's bedside. The requiem lay on the quilt, and Mozart was explaining to him how, in his opinion, he ought to finish it when he was gone. The doctor came after he'd finished at the opera and ordered cold poultices to be placed on Mozart's burning head, which however affected him to such an extent that he became unconscious and remained so until he died. His last movement was an attempt to express with his mouth the drum passages in the requiem.